The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Stone Zone. Well, disgraced former FBI Director James Comey has pled not guilty after being arraigned on charges of making false statements under oath and obstructing a congressional proceeding. Essentially the exact same two crimes that I was accused of. They threw a witness tampering charge in there, but if you really examine it, all I did was tell the guy who wasn't feeding his dog that I would take the dog away from him because I'm a dog lover. They said I was threatening a government witness. It's nonsense. But I wasn't given the privilege he was given. He wasn't required to do a perp walk. He was even allowed to enter the building through the back door to avoid attention from the media, a privilege that was not afforded to my wife and I when 29 heavily armed thugs came in with attack dogs, a battering ram to break down my front door. I opened the door looking down the barrel of two assault weapons. My wife, who's hard of hearing and didn't know that I had been arrested, had slept through all of this, was awoken looking down the barrel of two guns. She didn't know if this was a home invasion or what. And then she was humiliated and marched out in the street in her night clothes. Handled very, very differently than the case of James Comey. The exact same two crimes, in essence. When asked why he didn't do a flashy raid on Comey, the FBI Director Kash Patel said, "The mainstream media wants to take the eye off the ball and create theater." Well, I don't disagree with Kash in this sense. They stormed my home literally 24 hours after the grand jury indicted me. So it didn't leak, and they did it for maximum media attention. Talk about a stakeout. A stakeout is when you sit outside someone's house and wait for hours. I happen to know because I was watching. The CNN camera showed up approximately 13 minutes before the FBI. Some stakeout. And all of the rest of the media was down at the end of the road where I live, which was a short dead-end street. The police had roped off the end of the street. The rest of the media was behind a rope line there, a good half mile from the house. And when a Fort Lauderdale police officer who'd been called in to back up the FBI told the CNN crew they would have to go with the rest of the media, he got chewed out by an FBI agent who said that CNN had special permission to broadcast live my arrest. But once that opportunity, if Comey was not arrested in the immediate aftermath of his indictment, and that became an issue, the point now, of course, is that it would be pointless to do it. I think the point has been made. The Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, said the noise from MSC and from retired agents or unnamed anonymous sources about perp walks, all that's just noise. Let's recognize the Democrats pushing this whole Trump has weaponized the criminal justice system. He's just using it to go after his enemies. Exactly what they did to Trump, which is a false narrative, would only be empowered at this point if they perp walked, arrested Comey at a raid at his home in perp walked, as enjoyable as that might be. At the same time, I do think both Patel and Blanche kind of missed the point, which is the humiliation of the process is the punishment. The left understands this. That's why when we get into power and then we act with kid gloves. We're at war against the left. They want anyone to the right of Karl Marx to receive the Charlie Kirk treatment, and they say so. So I think it's time to use every tool at our disposal to demean, debauch, devastate, and defeat this enemy, starting with James Comey. I find it outrageous that there's a prosecutor, according to NBC and the UK Daily Mail, there's a prosecutor, Elizabeth Yusi, who oversees the major crimes prosecutions in the Norfolk office of the Eastern District of Virginia. She is reported by both media outlets to believe that the case against New York Attorney General Letitia James has no probable cause. But she has not yet formally told her boss, Lindsay Halligan, the acting interim U.S. attorney, that, which is highly irregular. I imagine Halligan is learning it through these media reports, but beyond that, it's also a violation of law. There's a specific law that says you cannot comment on an investigation that is still in process in which no final determination has been made. So Miss Yusey is acting in violation of the law. We had Sam Antar from White Collar Fraud on yesterday. He went through the case point by point. There's a very clear case, not just of a mortgage fraud, but a 43-year crime spree of mortgage fraud. So I think this is an interesting twist. It just shows you how all these U.S. attorneys' offices under Joe Biden and his predecessor, Barack Obama, because many of those people stayed in place, are infected with people posing as law enforcement unbiased professionals who are, in fact, the very people who tried to prosecute Donald Trump. And speaking of that, Jack Smith, in what has to be one of the most stunning revelations of all time, was actually spying on 8 members of the U.S. Senate. Didn't Richard Nixon go down for some of his minions breaking into the Watergate to spy on the Democrats, as I recall? So this is shocking in the sense that it is an example of the extra legal things that were used in the effort to get Donald Trump. Getting the judge Beryl Howell of D.C. to order that Donald Trump's own lawyer, Evan Corcoran, had to discuss all of his conversations with his client and disgorge all of their internal documents and emails, a violation of the Sixth Amendment. Where do you find a judge who would sign off on that? Oh, the District of Columbia. Another example of the tactics used to get Roger Stone. It's interesting because there has been a complaint pending at the Department of Justice regarding Jack Smith, who came originally out of Brooklyn, I believe, but who ends up with a very cushy job as a prosecutor for in the International Court representing the United States in The Hague. But there are allegations that when he was doing so, he shook down a number of people connected to the crisis in Kosovo who wanted to not be called war criminals. I know that General Flynn has seen the complaint and he believes it has merit, and that complaint's been sitting with the DOJ. But of course, there's no action on that. I would suggest that this new act of spying on the senators, let's find out what else Smith and his band of thugs did. Smith really would only fall, and his whole documents case at Mar-a-Lago collapsed when a courageous Florida judge ruling on the basis of the constitutional law pointed out that Jack Smith's appointment and the powers he was given as special counsel were not constitutional. He had never been confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Had he been a U.S. attorney elevated to the office of special counsel, he would have had legal authority, but that never happened. Additionally, there's no law creating his position, and there is no budget paying for his position and his activities. So this was the most vicious political weaponization of the justice system of all time, and they coordinated with prosecutors in Georgia and New York. They were all in the same room. This was a part of the organized takedown of Donald Trump and many of his supporters. And now we learn about Arctic frost. Arctic frost was just the next step of that. That was the code name for a specific Justice Department and law enforcement investigation under Joe Biden. You see, it really is one continuing conspiracy. It begins on July 17th, 2017, in an Oval Office meeting run by Barack Obama himself. Joe Biden's there. Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor, is there. James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, is present. The head of the CIA, John Brennan, the admitted communist, the man who got caught red-handed spying on a Senate committee previously that was investigating his illegal use of torture. That's the original cabal, but that seditious conspiracy, this tsunami of lawfare and impeachments all grow out of that meeting. Speaking of the impeachments, there is incredible news that, as I expected, the Trump second impeachment, the Ukraine impeachment, was not an offensive move against Trump. It was a defensive move to hide the illegal activities of Joe Biden and his son, exactly as we said. You remember Joe Biden said in the debate with Trump that no one in his family made a penny from any foreign country. But the Biden laptop, which they had to swiftly try to discredit just before the election, referred to Joe as the big guy. Turns out he was much bigger than we thought. A newly declassified memo shows that then Vice President Joe Biden's office intervened to prevent the Central Intelligence Agency from circulating a 2016 intelligence report detailing how top Ukrainian officials had dealt with his son in terms of their business dealings. This report, which was released by CIA Director Ratcliffe last week, complied redactions from senior Ukrainian officials following Biden's December 2015 trip to Kiev. This is the trip in which Biden basically goes and says, if you don't fire the prosecutor investigating my son and his client Burisma, I'm going to withhold this $1 billion. And he brags about this, an open act of bribery. They, of course, say, oh, well, Viktor Shokin was an out-of-control, corrupt prosecutor. No, Viktor Shokin was getting at the truth in a country where the truth is very hard to find. But this is really extraordinary. During the 2015 meeting, Biden pressured then President Poroshenko, as I say, to fire the country's top prosecutor, Viktor Shokin. This is according to the Daily Caller. At the time, Shokin was investing Burisma. Officials with Poroshenko's administration privately said that the U.S. media coverage of Hunter's business ties and saw them as evidence of the double standard in Washington's approach to corruption. So the point, of course, here is that Joe Biden and members of his family, and the House Oversight Committee has more than proved that, made tens of millions of dollars, which Joe Biden himself did share in, despite the fact that he claimed that he didn't. But it also enriched his brother, his son, and many members of the Biden crime family. He took bribes during the time he was vice president. The Oversight Committee has shown that. He took a massive bribe from China, basically giving it to the University of Pennsylvania, who turned around and gave Joe Biden essentially $1 million professorship for doing absolutely nothing. So Joe Biden should be prosecuted along with those in the cabal. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone, and we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back in the Stone Zone. A shocking new poll in the upcoming New York race for governor. Congresswoman Elise Stefanik is soaring in a new poll, showing her now just 5 points behind the incumbent Democrat Kathy Hochul. Hochul, you recall, was the lieutenant governor who moved up to the governor's office after the crash and burn of Andrew Cuomo, who resigned ahead of impeachment. This new poll shows that Stefanik has narrowed the gap to just 5 points, with Hochul at 48, Stefanik at 43. But interestingly enough, when voters are made aware that Hochul has endorsed the far-left radical Democrat socialist candidate for mayor of New York City, Zoran Mamdani, Stefanik then pulls into the lead, leading Hochul 46 to 45. This shows you what a polarizing figure Mamdani has already become. These findings are not surprising to me. They essentially show that Hochul is vulnerable. Other polling I've seen shows some of the highest job disapproval ratings and unfavorable ratings that I've ever seen by a politician. When I looked at polling that was intended for that special election for Stefanik's seat, Hochul's disapproval rating, even in that Republican district, was off the charts. You would have expected it to be high. But Stefanik is an outstanding candidate. She's battle-tested. She's been very aggressive, trying to hold the New York State's politicized judiciary to account, which was abused in the attempt to try to get Donald Trump. She has really distinguished herself in Congress, and she very graciously accepted the fact that the president decided to pull back her appointment as UN ambassador, where she would have done a terrific job because her service in the Congress was just too important with this slim Republican majority. And she has continued the fight, is now, I think, openly making it clear she intends to run for governor. I think that she's going to be a very strong candidate. Look, New York and New Jersey, these are very tough states. These are blue states, but you see it happening in the Garden State right now, where Jack Ciattarelli is coming on in the polls, and clearly victory is in his grasp if he can just hold on. And if they don't steal it in Camden and Newark and other big Democrat city machine strongholds. But if a Republican can win in New Jersey, Elise Stefanik could theoretically win in New York. It's going to be an extraordinary campaign, but given the high taxes, given the high crime rates, I believe she's extraordinarily vulnerable. And I'm glad to see that Stefanik is going to, as Richard Nixon would say, get in the arena. She's a fighter, and very clearly a Mamdani victory could actually propel Elise Stefanik to the governor's chair as the voters across New York State get an eye full of what Mamdani's soft on crime, high taxes will do for New York City. All right, we're out of time here. I want to thank you for joining us on the Stone Zone. We'll be right back with Richard Brzeczek. He is the former commissioner of the Chicago Police Department. Tell us about what's going on in the fight between Antifa and ICE law enforcement officials in the Windy City. Don't go away.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. Yesterday, we had Mark Vargas, the editor-in-chief of the Illinois Review, reporting on the shocking developments in Chicago. Yesterday, we reported that on Saturday, the Chicago police were ordered to stand down after a group of ICE agents were surrounded and in distress under attack from radical Antifa operatives in the city's Brighton Park neighborhood. Turns out that stand-down order came from the mayor and the governor themselves. There's some question as to whether they have some serious legal liability, but to get an assessment of the entire situation on the ground in Chicago, joining me now is the former commissioner of the Chicago Police Department, Richard Brzeczek. He is a hard-nosed, non-political, by-the-book, highly respected law enforcement officer and attorney, someone who rose from being a simple patrolman in the Chicago Police Department to the top job under one of Chicago's greatest mayors, Jane Byrne, who was a good friend of mine. And trust me, although she may have been a Mondale delegate, she definitely voted for Ronald Reagan. But Richard, thank you for joining us today on the show. I want to get your assessment of these shocking events. The idea that fellow law enforcement officers would be physically endangered and the Chicago police would stand idly by. I guess this is consistent with what you told us about the politicization of the once great Chicago Police Department.
That's absolutely correct, Roger. You have two people, Brandon Johnson, the DEI mayor of Chicago. That's dumb, evil, and incompetent, not the other DEI. But you got him, and you've got Pritzker, the wannabe next Democrat candidate for president in 2028, trying to make a name for themselves with their continuing anti-police decisions and activity. And when I say anti-police, they're telling the police to step down, is not trying to protect the Chicago police from harm. They're trying to really embarrass the police. The police, because of what happened, the Chicago Police Department is really kind of like the laughingstock of the United States, especially among the major cities, because that kind of order to stand down is disgraceful. It's despicable. It's a shameful order.
Well, Richard, it appears, based on everything I have read, that this order was handed down to the Chicago Police Department from Mayor Johnson and Governor Pritzker. Many legal analysts believe that puts both of them in legal jeopardy, that they could be held responsible in a spiraling legal crisis, because that is patently illegal, and they may have personal liability for anyone who is injured. And the president himself today blasted both Pritzker and Johnson, saying they should both be in jail for issuing these executive orders that prohibit the Chicago Police Department from obstructing federal law. This is shocking that in the once great city of Chicago, where Richard J. Daley, I don't mean Richie Daley, I mean Mayor Daley, who was the mayor during the 1968 Democrat Convention, a man who was seen on national television but not heard, saying two uncouth words at Abe Ribicoff, who was making an anti-war speech from the platform. Daley was a stout supporter of the Vietnam War, Lyndon Baines Johnson's conduct of it, and he opposed those in his party, like Eugene McCarthy and later Robert Kennedy, who broke with Johnson over the war. So I saw that the president ordered the Texas National Guard, or arranged the Texas National Guard to send 300 guardsmen to Chicago. Commissioner Brzeczek, can they be effective with that smaller force?
Sure, that can be effective. Well-trained personnel can be effective. And at the same time, there are other significantly large law enforcement agencies in the Chicago area, starting with the Chicago Police Department, whereby they can assemble large numbers of officers, with the appropriate riot gear if they need that, to go into an area fairly quickly. The thing is that this is a political game being played by two amateurs, Brandon Johnson and J.B. Pritzker in Illinois. And President Trump is absolutely correct. It isn't, I'm not sure about the civil liability of the mayor and the governor, because I haven't really looked at that area of the law recently, but the president is absolutely correct, because any action by a local official to interfere with, obstruct, obscure, defeat the actions of federal law enforcement officers, whether it's by action or a refusal of an action, can subject them to criminal prosecution for interfering with a federal law enforcement officer. And they don't really care.
Let me make clear to people, just so you know, Richard Brzeczek is not only served the city as probably their last great police commissioner, but he also is an attorney. He was a partner at the firm of Levy and Aarons, where he was specialized in commercial litigation, bankruptcy, and real estate law, and later went into private practice, concentrating primarily in criminal defense, with experience with civil jury trials, administrative hearings of criminal and civil practices, and the state and federal courts. So he's not just a law enforcement officer, he's a skilled attorney. So I give great weight to his words regarding the possible penalties here. Richard is a graduate of the University of Chicago Law School. It's amazing to me that J.B. Pritzker and Mayor Johnson says the Republicans want a civil war, yet he's the guy who has hooligans throwing bricks, rocks, bottles, swinging clubs at police officers. He's the one who has Antifa operatives surrounding and endangering ICE agents who are merely trying to carry out their responsibilities of arresting and deporting some of the most dangerous bio-criminals in society. This administration recognizes that there are many people in the country illegally who are peaceful, and the emphasis has been on identifying those with criminal records, either here or substantial criminal records where they came from, and deporting them first. But that is not not being assisted by the Pritzker Johnston Brigade. The politicization of the Chicago Police Department, Richard, this is not something that happened yesterday, is it?
No, it isn't. It started under Richard M. Daley, the second Daley mayor.
Richie.
He was the one that began the program with his so-called merit appointments in promotions. These are people who couldn't pass promotional exams but were promoted anyway because they had political connections. And they even were so bold to post the list of the political merit appointees as to who their sponsor was. It could be an alderman, it could be a state senator, it could be a U.S. congressman or senator. They posted, their sponsor right there, made no bones about it. I mean, you talk about chutzpah. I mean, at least in the old days when they fixed the promotion list, they fixed it in secret, and made it look like it was, legitimate until the U.S. government Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department came in 1972 and legitimatized all the exams. But, what happens here is they just do what they want. We see it not only in Chicago. We saw it during the Biden administration in Washington. We saw it in the Obama administration in Washington. You see it with Hochul up in New York, any place, Newsom in California. They just do what they want. They don't care about consequences because, they're so corrupt. It's gotten to the point where corruption to them is their new normal. And that's the way it is. And they've always been corrupt, but now it's openly, outwardly corrupt. And the problem is that President Trump is taking the position of cleaning up the corruption, cleaning up the crime, cleaning up the politicization, where people have, the right to vote has been affected. They've been denied because of the vote fixing. That's been going on all the time in the Democrat cities.
Wait a minute. Vote fixing in Chicago? I've never heard of such a thing. It's amazing.
Well,
a few days ago, Mayor Johnson signed an executive order that designates parts of the city of Chicago as ICE-free zones. The order bars city police from sharing information with federal immigrant officials or assisting in arrests involving illegals. Johnson said the policy was intended to protect immigrant communities. What about protecting the law-abiding citizens of the city of Chicago? I guess he doesn't care about that. By the way, virtually all legal analysts say that this order signed by the mayor is a blatant violation of federal law. Specifically, it violates 8 U.S. Code 1324, as it is a felony to conceal, harbor, or shield from detection an individual known to be in the country illegally. Anyone, whether a private citizen or an elected official who aids and abets such actions could face up to 5 years in prison or more if the offense involves violence or results in injury. So it sounds to me like Pritzker Johnson and perhaps Pritzker, if he also was a party to this, which he was, could have a serious problem. Additionally, other legal analysts point out that 18 U.S. Codes Section 111 makes it a crime to forcibly audit, resist, oppose, impede, intimidate, or interfere with federal officers engaged in their duties, which is punishable by up to 8 years in prison if the officer is injured. And then, of course, 18 U.S. Code 1505 criminalizes obstruction of federal proceedings or investigations, carrying an additional penalty for up to 5 years. I'll tell you this, J.B. Pritzker would lose some weight in prison, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, he'd probably be, holding court in prison, talking, to all his Democrat voters who put him into office, even while they were in prison, about how great he is. But the problem is that these people simply, want to demonstrate their pejorative ignorance. Johnson would be better off if he created ice-free zones in his frozen brain. It would maybe loosen up a little bit, and he could see what the law is and what people are entitled to in terms of overall safety.
Brandon Johnson is an embarrassment. First of all, he has a 6% approval rating. My sources tell me that he's in and out of the hospital with panic attacks. He's not up to this job. He spews nonsense about civil war, and he keeps calling on the city residents of the city to rise up and resist these federal officers doing their duty. That's an act of insurrection. I think that's highly illegal. He also said, this shocks me, but I do love it. He said that all of the problems of the city of Chicago, including the rise in crime, were Richard Nixon's fault. Richard Nixon's been dead Richard Nixon's been dead for 40 years. I think what this lame brand was trying to say is that Nixon's Southern strategy is the cause of New York, of the country's racial problems. Let's be very clear. Richard Nixon, who desegregated the public schools, 86% of public schools were segregated when Nixon became president. When he left office, that number was 16, with no bloodshed, done totally legally through lawsuits, nobody killed, no violence. Richard Nixon, who tripled the funding for black colleges. Richard Nixon, who increased ninefold civil rights law enforcement in the U.S. Justice Department. Richard Nixon, who gave us affirmative action, which many of my conservative friends despise, but was a huge leg up for the black community. So the myth of the Southern strategy that Nixon, yes, he did have to run between Hubert Humphrey on his left and George Wallace on his right in the South and carry those border Southern states in order to win the 1960 election. So the Southern strategy of having a number of conservatives support you, if you look at his actual civil rights record, well, the 1958 Civil Rights Act would not have passed the U.S. Senate, but for Vice President Richard Nixon going out and rounding up the votes, for which Dr. Martin Luther King wrote him a glowing letter. So I'm not sure what Brandon Johnson's talking about. The fact that he's even in office and that he continues to impede this heroic effort where these law enforcement officers with ICE are putting their lives on the line to fulfill their duties. You would expect that they could have the local police at their back as opposed to standing by idly as their lives are endangered. Anyway, we're with Richard Brzeczek. He's the former commissioner of the Chicago Police, and we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Thank you for staying with us here in the Stone Zone. We're talking to Richard Brzeczek, the former commissioner of the Chicago Police Department in the once great Windy City. Chicago used to be known as the city that worked. That's when Richard J. Daley was mayor, succeeded by his able taxi commissioner, Jane Byrne, who was a great woman, a great mayor. She served when Richard Brzeczek was the police commissioner. I think the Chicago Police Department really went downhill under Rahm Emanuel in an incredible scandal where the department essentially hid evidence regarding a shooting of I think it was an African American by officers who were white. Tell us about that, Richard.
That was the Laquan McDonald case. What happened is there probably were 24 to 15 officers at the scene. Nobody had their guns out. The kid was a little hyper, and he had a small knife in his hand, although you can get hurt by a small knife very seriously. And they were keeping him at bay. And one of the last cars that pulled up, the officer got out of his car, walked around the car, took his gun out, and he put 16 shots into Laquan McDonald. Even after he went down, he was shooting into his body. And no one thought that this was ever going to get out because they had an informal policy in Chicago to turn the in-car cameras off. And one car had an in-car camera that happened to be going. And it caught the whole thing. It would happen right in front of that car's camera. And all hell broke loose. Not right away, because while the bosses and Rahm Emanuel knew about it the next morning as to what exactly happened, it took a freelance reporter, not the fake news that's in Chicago, who protects all the Democrats over there all the time, but an independent reporter who got a Freedom of Information Act request granted by a judge, who ordered the video to be released. And they went into high gear. The Democrat state's attorney, the prosecutor of the county, indicted the shooting officer the day before the judge released the video. So, everything was, CYA.
CYA. Wow, that's extraordinary. Yeah. Rahm Emanuel, who I hear, by the way, is actually thinking about running for president. I know that sounds crazy, but he recognizes the total absence of a field, and he is a wily, canny guy who understands the game. Not an admirer by any means, but he didn't get to be mayor of Chicago for no reason. He did not get to elect a president for no reason. All right, I'm afraid we have to leave it there. I want to thank our guest, former Police Commissioner Richard Brzeczek, who always brings the heat and the real authority on what's going on the ground in the Windy City. Thank you for joining us today on the Stone Zone. We are here 5 days a week, and here we talk news, politics, history, and food, my other favorite subject. Until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?